Alright, today we're going to be tearing into a 1987 Quadrunner 250. We've already adjusted the valves. I showed you how to do that. Now we're going to go ahead and pull cylinder head, camshaft, cylinder, piston, recoil, stator, flywheel. We're going to pull all those parts off. So we've already pulled, since we adjusted the valves on this, we pulled all the recoil bolts off already. There's your recoil pull starter. Again, the handle is broke here, but we've got the rope still intact there. It still functions. We just need to put a handle on it and make sure that rope is long enough to pull this cover off. Then we've got 8mm bolts all the way around it. Then we're going to want to remove that recoil cup gear there. I've got a mess of these bolts all the way around this. And then there's 14mm bolt there. Pull this off. These sometimes are sealed with an O-ring, and so they can be a bit of a challenge to come off of there. Generally not this much of a challenge. Be careful, that is the crankshaft that we're pulling on there. So it's, there we go, we're getting some movement there. So sealed up really well, that seal there. Looks like that is was replaced at one time, so it's sealed tightly. All right, we'll pull our, there's a shift arm here. Takes a 10mm. This is a spline gear, and then it's got a line right there that this line matches up with. And then what I do is just take a hammer and I tap on it a couple different places while kind of halfway pulling out on it. That just kind of breaks that seal. And if you can kind of push on the areas that are protrude a little bit from the case, that way you don't damage the seal area. This case is aluminum, so just be careful you're not putting too much pressure on it. You will break tabs if you're beating on it too much with a hammer. And pull that off there. We've got a little, here's your stator here, and then your pulsar up top here, and this is your flywheel here. And this flywheel is magnetic, so there will be some pull against it when you're trying to remove that. Clean the oil out of there. We've got all your shift components up here. We've got 2 shift forks, and here's your starter idler gear. Go ahead and pull that off. Grab a larger socket to do that. takes a 22 millimeter. And I'll hang on to this flywheel while I turn it off. Alright, that had some thread lock on it. Now to pull this flywheel off, you gotta have a flywheel puller. And it looks like this here. This one's actually too big. Try that one there, but first we're going to put this cap on there. And this will keep your threads from getting damaged on your crank. And then thread this on all the way. This is going to push down against the crank. And the reason why you put that cap is on there because when you run this down that crank, that threaded area is extremely small and could potentially damage your crank if you just ran this down on top of that crank. And you can feel it pop off there, and then at that point you can spin it off. It's going to be hitting that cap that you put on there, so you've got to pull this crank off and the cap in order to pull that flywheel the rest of the way off. So we've got a one-way gear behind it. There's the one-way gear, or the one-way bearing. Here's your idler gear here. That goes from your starter to your flywheel starter gear. And then this gear sits down inside of that. And it'll just spin one way. If it's spinning both ways, or if your four-wheeler's not starting, you can just hear gears spinning. That's what's happening. It's not engaging and turning that flywheel. Here's your cam chain clear down here on the bottom and your guide. And we'll go ahead and pull that cylinder head next after we get all these gears out of here. Shift shaft there. Alright, we'll leave those for now. We're going to go ahead and pull this gear position sensor. Two Phillips screws to remove that. And this sensor is actually broken. There's a plastic piece that should sit right in there if you can see that. So we won't spend a lot of time pulling that off. Should have been a 10 millimeter for this bolt here. And I got switched out to a metric. That's junk, and now this arm here is junk. And be careful prying against it like this. You don't want to damage that case. I've got a 10 millimeter back here to remove that arm. I guess we wouldn't have to do any of this now, but since we've got the motor turned this way. And that arm is still good. And we will set that down there. We've got an arm here, spring loaded. Goes to that shift drum there. This bearing looks to be stuck on there. So it might take a little bit of time to work off, but we're going to go ahead and pull this cylinder head, and then we'll pull the cylinder itself. We've got a bunch of 10 millimeters up top, but we want to take this cam chain tensioner out first. That's 2 Allen screws, and then a 10 millimeter up top here. We're going to pull it all out together. So if you're tightening that cam chain back up or putting this motor back together, we'll loosen this, and we'll do that at some point. But we'll just pull it all out together at this point. Cam chain tensioner's out. We've got a mess of 10 millimeter bolts up top here. Here's your valve cover here, your cylinder head cover. Got a rubber cap here that is just keeping us hung up. But there's your cover there. It's got your rockers inside of here. You've got your camshaft here. And we've got a flatten. You probably won't be able to see very well, but we've got a keeper down here that we have to flatten to undo these cam chain sprocket bolts. See about turning that. See if this will give us enough. Oh, that's not going to do it. We need to get to that bottom mount on that sprocket. We'll see if we can get that chain off. We might be able to get that chain off without. I'm going to loosen this cam chain guide on the side here. Maybe that'll give us a little more. Generally you would do this before you remove the pull starter here. That way you can pull this pull that cam around there. But if we can get that guide out of there far enough, we might be able to get enough slack in there. Guide is out. I think we're gonna have enough slack in there to get that cam chain off. We may not, so. We'll go ahead and pull that clutch cover. Then we'll use that clutch to spin that motor. Got a handful of, well, a lot of 8mm on this as well. Oil filter cover down here, and that's a 10mm. We've got a clutch adjust here. I'll leave that on for now, but I'll pull this cover so you can see what's underneath there. That's how you adjust your clutch. So you've got a 12mm. I'll tip this up so you can see a little bit better. To adjust your clutch on this Quadrunner 250, you pull this cap here, and you've got a 12mm bolt on the inside that you loosen up, and then you've got a Phillips screw. And you just slightly, what is that? You gotta slightly loosen that up. And take your Phillips screwdriver and run that in until there's pressure on it, and then back it out about 1/8 of a turn. And that's where you adjust your clutch to. When you're driving along, if it's continuously slipping, you can adjust that. If you're having to really rev it up to get it to go anywhere, that's where you adjust that. So make sure that's in the right position. Starter, two 8mm starter bolts there that hold the starter on. You know, you've got this 10mm oil filter cover here. Here's your sight glass. Spring loaded in there. Make sure that spring goes back in. Got all the bolts around the outside out. Kind of a hollow sound when you break that seal from that gasket. You want to be careful pounding on it like that so you don't hit it in the wrong spot. Oil should have been drained out of here, but evidently not all of it. So there's your clutches there. Now we can take and turn this motor over. Oh, if it's in gear, and it may not turn over, it may be locked up, which is why we're tearing it down. We weren't told as to why it was getting tore down. So, yeah, it's definitely not moving. Well, what we can do is take a screwdriver, and it's in the right position where we can tap that keeper down. Making sure not to damage that head. And we might be able to pull that 10 millimeter out far enough to where we can pull that cam chain off of that sprocket. There we go. That would allow us to turn that sprocket enough to, well, there we go. Got it off finally. What we did there, so you know what we did was loosen this bolt enough. It was clear down in there. Loosen that bolt enough to where we could get that sprocket turned sideways enough to get that bolt off of there. So there's the camshaft. Go ahead and slide that bolt back on there. Now we'll be able to pull that cylinder head completely off. See what is locked up on that motor. We've got 4 of those bolts. $10mm bolts down here. Or nuts that run, studs run up into the cylinder head. So we'll pull these off here, and that should be the only thing holding this head on now. That gasket might, well, that gasket's easy enough. Head was off there, and I see some rust, so that might be part of our problem, but there is the head, there's the valves there. There is a little bit of rust, but looks like just surface rust. Motor is definitely not coming out of there, or that cylinder. Pull these off here. A couple more 10mm running into the bottom of that motor. Alright, those 10mm are off. The cylinder should come off at this point, but it seems to be stuck. I'm going to take a hammer and there we go, we're able to free it up. So now we'll be able to, yep, there we go. That's all it needed to kind of break free. Your last guide is out there. now out, and it's not terrible. It's got some scoring in there, but not what I had imagined for how tough it was. You can see there's our problem there, the skirt of the piston, it all broke off. So that's got to be down on the motor somewhere, probably holding us from turning that motor all the way over. We'll go ahead and continue moving these clutches here. We've got 1 3/16 bolt here. And this is going to be, you're going to turn this clockwise to remove that bolt or that nut here. So make sure you're turning that one the right way. Generally, you turn a nut clockwise or counterclockwise. This one you turn it clockwise to remove it. So then there's your centrifugal clutch there, and your centrifugal clutch housing is there. We've got a one-way bearing on the inside. Pull your the clutch basket off with the friction plates. A 10mm bolt to pull this arm off. Came off there, this arm will go to the shift shaft there. Now we'll pull that clutch basket off. Pull the springs out. Got 1 1/16 here. Hanging on to the post of the clutch. That's regular threaded, so you turn that counterclockwise to remove it. Now what I do, set those bolts aside, and I go ahead and put these springs back in here. Tighten these back up, do them in a cross pattern. Then we can just lift this clutch pack out of there. And that'll kind of keep, well, keep everything together. There's your clutch pack assembly there. There's your basket. Got a spacer and a washer in behind there. We can take that clutch pack, set it back down in that basket. Keep that all together. Now we've got this gear controls your oil pump, which is here. That's so that crankshaft gear spins that oil pump gear there. And that is held on with a small clip. You can remove this with a small screwdriver. Just get in behind that clip there and pry it off, but keep your finger on top of it to keep it from going flying. Take that pin out there so you don't drop it in the bottom of that motor. then I always use an impact driver to remove this oil pump. That way we don't round off those Phillips screws that are oily and they can spin way too easily if you just put a screwdriver on there. Alright, and then your oil pump is off there. And I always like to put these screws back in. Put the clip back in, or the pin back in. Put the gear back on. And then we've got the clip here that we can put back in. That just kind of holds everything together there. And that just kind of holds it together. That's not the right way of going back on, but we'll, obviously we're not going to put it back on without taking that gear off, so. We'll remove our speedo cable here. Take out that 10 millimeter, that Phillips there, and that whole gear should pop out of there. We're going to unscrew this cable first. Set that aside. Your gear will come out of here. We'll use two 8 millimeter bolts. Alright, that pulls off there. There's what your speedo drive assembly looks like. We've got your shift star here with your shift shaft. We'll pull this gasket off. Your starter should just pop off of there. I have to tap on it from the other side. It's held on with O-rings, or it's sealed with O-rings. Sometimes those can be a challenge to come off of there. 12 millimeter to get that arm off, and a 10 to get this other shift star off. And the other arm there. Whoops, that fell all the way down through that motor there. This shift assembly is spring loaded, so be careful pulling it apart. The star, there's little teeth back here, little pins that'll pop out, and one of them did, so we'll have to grab that. Now that is all we've got to take off right there. We'll pull some 8 millimeter bolts. We'll get ready to split this motor here. We've got a yoke up front we need to remove yet, starter, piston. And we'll keep on going with this motor here. There, that starter comes out there. Make sure it spins freely. We can hook it up to power, make sure that it's got good power and doesn't make any unusual sounds. Looks like we have all those bolts off. We've got a 12 millimeter bolt here we'll pull. We've got your drain. Here it's got three 8 millimeters. This wouldn't have to come off to split the case, but we'll just pull it while we're here. There's your drain plate there, your drain pan. We've got a screen down there that kind of catches stuff going through that oil pump. We'll go ahead and pull this yoke set off here while we're here. And what I like to do for this is find 2 screwdrivers that are the same length, and sometimes you don't even have to use them, but I like to have them close by. So I've got 2 here, and we're going to remove the 2 that are attached to the yoke that's attached to the motor. So take these clips out because this U-joint feels good. We'll save the U-joint with the yokes. If we can get them just off enough to get our screwdriver in behind. Then pull those clips out. So we've got this one out. Now we'll work on this one. Alright, that one popped out finally enough to get in behind there. Alright, that clips out. Now what you do is take and flip that over. We'll tap this. Once you get it far enough out, those caps will just pop right off. So take and turn it, do the same thing to this side. That cap came apart there, we'll have to put those pins back together. And you're able just to kind of work that U-joint out of there. Okay, that U-joint is out, and I'll pull this yoke off. It's like probably a 19 or so. This is a 7/8. And that yoke will just pop right off of there. Flip this motor over now and see what bolts we got us holding on this side. Alright, we've got a bunch of 8mm bolts over here. Okay, we've got one right here, right in front of that cylinder, and that might be our last one. I see one in behind this gear, so we're gonna get a pair of snap ring pliers off, pull that gear.